Hi, Jeff. This is podcast number 4 of School of Thought. It's good to be back here again with you today.
Yeah, it is. Here we are.
Yeah, we've had some good conversations. I'm looking forward to having today's conversation. And School of Thought is definitely a school of thought. At the moment, the podcast is concerned with covering we call them your convictions. There's 20 real convictions that you believe in and that you know to be true about ideal education. And these are the things that you want to share out and make accessible to other people. So we'll be talking about conviction 3 today, but I'll introduce us first. Anybody who's been following along knows who you and I are, but anybody who's joining today for the first time, I'm talking with Jeff Hopkins, who's the principal of the Pacific School of Innovation and Inquiry, which is located in Victoria, BC, and which really revolves around personalized inquiry as the learning modality. So learners just come and follow their interests and cover their curriculum that way. We do go into depth about that with the podcast. And I'm Alex Van Tall. I am a researcher, a journalist, a mother of a learner who goes to Jeff's school, a writer, a thinker, all kinds of things. In this case, I'm putting on my journalist hat and interviewing Jeff to sort of draw out the information in your brain, Jeff, so that other people can understand your thinking and apply your principles in their own educational settings. So that's my long intro. How's your week going?
It's good. It's been good. We just finished up the last week of September, and one of the learners at school just showed me he modified his calendar because he had a deadline for something for the end of September. So he just made a September 31st and a September 32nd, which I thought was a really good idea. So I'm going to take a chapter out of that book.
That's awesome. You're not ready for September to be quite over yet. You still got stuff to do?
Yeah. Didn't quite fit it all into that month. How about you?
That's funny. No, I was just saying to somebody, September has felt like a fast flowing river. You know, it's okay because I'm in the kayak and I've got the paddle, but boy, is it ever, it's a fast moving flow this year.
That's a good way to describe it.
Yeah.
I think we're in the same river.
Yeah, we must be in the same river, perhaps right near the same gravel bar.
Yes.
Okay, well, cool. So yeah, today we're talking about your third conviction. And again, these are not, they're not in an order of, oh, this one must come first, this one must come second. This is just sort of what came out of your mind a couple of months ago when you really put your thoughts around it. So today we're going to talk about that natural human learning is interdisciplinary, meaning it crosses boundaries. So right off the top, how do you explain that one?
Well, actually, at one level, I think this will be really easy for people to kind of picture, just because if there's something you really want to learn in your life, I don't think you stop first to say, is this going to be social studies or math or science? Like you don't do that. You just learn the thing. Away you go. And whatever the thing is, it very well likely has pieces to it that would be considered, belonging to different, more than one discipline. There's a good chance anyway. And so it seems like we've just kind of talked ourselves into having these containers for learning in a formal school system, whereas outside of that, I don't think we ever do that. I don't think we ever even bother to think about necessarily what the container is.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. The schedule in a classic educational environment is kind of broken into segments according to subject throughout the day, but yeah, that's artificial because you can only be engaged in math for a certain length of time, and then bing, the bell goes and it's time to make your way to gym class. And we have a bit of that in the adult world, but in terms of the actual disciplines, it's more like our days are divided into projects, not subjects. Do you know what I mean? Like, when I'm sitting and writing a case study, I don't I don't like only do the grammar checking between 9 and 9:30 in the morning, and then, you know, actually pull the concepts together at a different time. So it is a bit of an artificial construct.
It's pretty artificial, yeah. And I think depending on the example, like it can be, you know, more or less artificial depending on what you're talking about. And then I think even within the divisions that you talked about, where a day at school could be divided into subjects, even sometimes the activities within those subjects are interdisciplinary, and we don't always kind of recognize that or allow for that to happen, because we've decided that, you know, the context for this activity today is biology, so don't you dare, you know, think about anything else. It's all about biology. And we
Yeah.
can
So
talk the kids into that sometimes. Like I've had arguments with learners from time to time where they say, why are you talking to me about my writing? This is social studies. And it'll be like, well, sorry, like, sorry about that. What was I thinking? You know, heaven forbid that the way you get an idea across in writing would have anything to do with social studies. But, you know, I can see how they got to that, you know, got to that place.
well, and I'm thinking back to when I was teaching, and oh my goodness, I'm actually forgetting the term that we used to use, but there was an acknowledgement that really good, rich learning would jump from subject to subject. It wasn't like cross-curricular connections. There was another really good term for it. But I found that in that classic school environment where we had timetables and we had our subjects to teach, you know, it was tough to convince the science teacher that she also needed to spend some time working with the children on the writing in their labs, because she felt she had to cover all of her curriculum. And, you know, I can't take time from science to work on language arts. And so even though we have good intentions out there in the traditional system, the way that those classrooms are structured and the way that the school is structured is really difficult to actually sink into that interdisciplinarity. So Sai does it differently. Now, what do you do?
Well, I mean, a few things. I mean, when you were just giving that example, I think we've tried to build a system that makes that possible by saying, let's design a course that's roughly, you know, 1/8 of the timetable, like 1/8 of the time in a week or a day, so that the things you're doing during that 1/8 is only science. And you try to design a course that kind of fits into that amount of time, so that there really is an allotment of time for each of the things you're trying to learn within each subject. But that usually quickly gets blown out of the water as soon as you consider the actual, you know, human beings in the room, because then you got somebody who, you know, you've planned I don't know, a little something within a lesson, an objective within a lesson that you think is going to take 15 minutes, and some people already know it. It takes them 1 minute, and other people it takes 15 minutes, and then other people it takes an hour or 7. And so your plan is usually dead in the water before it even starts anyway. So it really is stressful to set up a school that way. So we just don't do that. We just say, let's we do have a schedule. Our schedule, though, isn't built around subjects. It's built around learning topics, or sometimes loose kinds of groupings around competencies that learners attach themselves to as they fit their lines of inquiry. So actually, this was just the other day yesterday on Twitter, somebody was saying, anybody got any good ideas for how to infuse more inquiry into labs, into biology labs? You know, and I was saying, you know, one of the things that can do that is people come to the lab with different objectives. The learners come with different objectives. And the teacher said, but I have objectives for the lab. And I said, well, then don't bother, because there's no inquiry. So you can't infuse inquiry in something that doesn't have any.
Right.
But, you know, for example, we just did a dissection lab recently, and some people were there because they just want to do a dissection. Some people are there to do some pretty heavy duty biology 12 kind of labeling of things and understanding how the functions of things work. Some people were there for art because they wanted to know, how do I draw squishy things inside the body of an animal? You know, how do I draw an eyeball? How would I draw the lens of an eye, so that it was actually all about art? Someone was there because they wanted to observe the different feelings people had about cutting into animals
Oh,
that were dead.
interesting.
And they were just watching people's reactions and the language they were using and their facial expressions. So everybody was doing the same lab, but nobody was doing the same lab.
Wow. I see what you mean then. Like you were just talking about objectives and having, you know, like inviting people in with their own objective for learning, right?
Yes.
And so,
Yeah.
yeah, that naturally does set itself up to work well with interdisciplinarity.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really good. It's really nice.
So now, one of the points that you had made, I'm just looking at the sheet of notes that you made when you were breaking down this conviction. You say, when disciplinary boundaries are erased or crossed, it can help people better contextualize their learning, use that learning to understand things that may seem unrelated, and also find motivation. And you've given an example here, like if something is really difficult to understand in one discipline, sometimes jumping over to a different discipline makes the learning more accessible. Where have you seen that happening with your learners?
So many places. I think a lot of it's about analogy. So a lot of it's about finding something that's analogous to a key principle in one discipline, and there's a really good example of something that's sort of analogous to it in another completely different context, completely different discipline. So math comes up a lot to me because I think we just do a terrible job of teaching math in our mainstream education system, generally speaking. And it's about teaching people a way of doing things that we then test to make sure they're doing it that way. And then we move on to the next thing. And often they're very disconnected and people aren't seeing kind of the big picture of what is this all about? What's this math business anyway? So quite often we'll look for analogies in other disciplines to help people understand a mathematical concept. Today, we did something on visualizing mathematical thinking. And again, it was very interdisciplinary, but people were coming in with problems that they were trying to kind of quantify. And they're saying, like, how could I show this, this thing that I found in a numerical way and then in a visual way that showed, that reflected that well. So we were looking at all sorts of different visualization techniques that had math underneath them. So different kinds of graphs and diagrams and infographics, how you could really make it easy for somebody to see something in an infographic that might be very difficult to explain in just numbers. So sometimes, I use that example because sometimes even when the learner's not trying to do it, but we're trying to help them understand something, there might be a way to draw something or play a game that helps them understand a concept that has nothing to do with the game. It's just analogous to it. I was trying to teach somebody how the difference between 3 dimensions and 4 dimensions. And we were talking about how when you're trying to fold 3 dimensions into 4, you take a volleyball and you draw, you start at the North Pole like it's the Earth, and you draw a line straight down from the Earth to the equator, or from the North Pole to the equator. And then you draw a line straight around from the equator to a quarter of the way around the globe, so it's a straight line. Then you draw another straight line back up to the North Pole again. If that was drawn on a flat piece of paper, each of those angles would be, they would add up to 180 degrees. But when you do it on a ball, the angles add up to 270 degrees. But it's the same triangle and they're straight lines, and it blows everybody's mind.
Totally.
When you're trying to explain like the 4th dimension to somebody in physics, but you get a volleyball and draw it with a marker and talk about some really simple, grade 7 math, it's a really nice way to get that across.
Well, okay, 2 things on what you were talking about. You're talking about the power of analogy as a way of connecting dots between one sector or one discipline and another. And I noticed that as a writer and as a teacher, I notice very, very powerfully when somebody else in the world is a really good storyteller. So I have found that the best teachers are the people who have a ready store of analogies in their mind that they can pull forward and help people grasp.
Yeah.
And that's really what makes a compelling storyteller, and stories are things that we remember.
Absolutely, yes.
And so I don't know if you've ever read this book, Thinking in Systems.
Oh yeah, that's a great book. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Like, I am super excited about this because I'm reading it from the perspective of organizational culture. But Dana Meadows, the author, like you were talking about using simple diagrams to explain
Totally.
complex concepts, right?
Yeah.
And she's also, you know, she connects the dots for readers by using like 3 different analogies. One is, she's talking about like animals. She talks about how governments need certain things, what consumers think about. So she frames the teaching in consistently. She comes back to these 3 different, you know, here's a way that you can think about it, or here's a way you can think about it, or here's a way. And one of those 3, and usually all 3, help to enrich my learning. So I can see the value of those interdisciplinary connections through analogies.
They're there. Another analogy, and you reminded me, I don't know, something about that book. I don't think it's in there, but it reminded me, but music is a very interesting way to talk about math. And people always say, oh, there's a lot of math in music. And they say, how? And they're like, oh, I don't know. But I hear there is. So just the other day, we had somebody who was trying to understand what it means to divide by a fraction. And they could not for the life of them figure out what that means and why when you divide by fractions, you get bigger numbers. They're like, what is going on? And so one of our teachers here, Anton, he said, well, in music, he goes, imagine something with a whole bunch of little tiny notes. And he explained that the notes are in fractions. So 1 is a whole, then you have half, quarter, 1/8, 16th. So he said, how many 16th notes would fit into a whole? And they went, 16. He's like, right. How many quarter notes? 4. He goes, right. So when you divide 1 up into fractions, you get more of them when they're smaller fractions. They go, oh, great. Got it.
Done.
No problem. They totally have a concept now. That was it. It took 10 seconds. And now they completely understand what it means to divide by fraction because they go, oh, I'm dividing a big thing up into smaller pieces. And music is a great analogy for that. And they can even hear it. They would say, oh yeah, I could hear it. It would be like really, the learner even said it'll be really like lots and lots of notes in a very short period of time if they're small fractions. It's like, that's correct.
So interesting. So for somebody who's listening who's looking for a practical, immediate tool to implement, you know, in favor of bringing up the level of interdisciplinarity, would you advise to just spend some time thinking about analogous things in an adjacent field?
Yeah, I think so. And even I think this is the part that we're not very good at sometimes as educators too, is we might not know what that analogy is, and we might want to ask the learners if they can think of any. So we will often invite people to say, can you think of a way to explain this in a completely different, you know, medium or context or whatever? And quite often people do come up with brilliant analogies. Like, that's a good one. I never thought of that before. We even had somebody who was trying to describe a sociological phenomenon. They just couldn't think of the words to describe it, so they painted it. And she spent about 2 weeks doing quite a beautiful painting, actually. And then when describing the painting, was able to express what she was trying to get across about sort of a phenomenon in sociology that she just didn't know what it was called or how to describe it, but she could paint it. Wow. And then in the painting, when she was describing it, we totally knew what she meant, and we were able to help her find the terminology to be able to do the research in sociology that she just didn't know what it was called.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, it's fun. It's really great.
So what you were just saying there, you know, instead of always it being down to the teacher to come up with the analogy, to hold the microphone out to the learners, that's another reminder that where we're going in education is that teachers don't need to be subject matter experts, and we can let go of that. We can work towards putting that down and actually taking a learning stance and learning from our own students.
Definitely. I mean, I think it's nice to have some expertise because it will help you come up with those analogies. And in our school also, we work as teams. We don't have 30 people in a room with us with the door closed and the bell rings and they leave. We'll get a new 30. If I need to talk to Anton about something musical, the learner and I walk across the building to Anton and say, hey, can we talk to you about music for a minute? So we share the expertise as well. But you're right that our expertise is about learning and teaching. It's as well as sometimes about subject matter, but we need to be expert teachers, not expert mathematicians necessarily.
Right, like expert guides for young developing brains and spirits, right? And
Absolutely.
I do know that, you've got subject matter experts, at work at Sci. So, Anton and a lot of you overlap, right? So there's music with Anton, and I know Jess is your chem guru, correct? And you
Yep.
do your physics, and you're also psychology, and you're
Yep.
sort of current events
Yep. And literature.
and literature. Yeah. So you are all sharing around that wisdom. But like you say, you can just walk across the school and connect with another teacher with a question that a learner has.
Yes. And we're not interrupting their class, and it's not an imposition. It's actually how we do business.
Awesome. Yeah, it's not an imposition because there's not that rigidity adhering to a class by class schedule.
Yeah.
All right, we got a big word here, Jeff Hopkins.
Okay. Okay. Sorry.
It has 4 syllables.
Oh, no, another word.
I think we talked about it. We talked about it in a previous episode, but it's consilience.
Yes.
And the first couple of times you used the word with me, I wasn't sure what it meant, but now I have a good understanding. So I'll invite you to give a basic, nutshell definition, and then I will read sort of an example that I pulled from Wikipedia. So
Yeah, great. Great.
yeah, what's consilience when you explain it to people?
Well, it's funny. I didn't know the word until a friend of mine, John Abbott, recommended a book to me called Consilience.
That's right, E.O. Wilson.
Yeah, by E.O. Wilson. I think he may very well be the person who coined the term. I'm not sure, but he certainly is the one who used it in the way that I'm sort of intending it here. He talks about it in a few ways, and he talks about the word evolving from originally meaning following multiple processes to get to the same conclusion. And that kind of strengthens the conclusion, because if each of those different processes work, it sort of cross validates one another and kind of adds extra validity to the finding, which I find really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then he kind of extended it even further to saying not only could that be cross method, but it could be cross discipline. So there could be analogous routes to the same problem in a completely different discipline that can arrive at the same conclusion in that context that transfers over into another context very easily. So you might, for example, be doing something that's very biological, and that could also make a lot of sense mathematically, or it could make a lot of sense in literary analysis. And so that consilience is like being ready and able to cross over into another context or methodology to examine the same thing, maybe from a completely different point of view, even outside of the discipline.
Yeah, and so because it's a concept that's worth unpacking, and I do remember now we talked about the Edward O. Wilson book last time.
Yeah.
I just went on to Google and looked up consilience, and of course the first hit is Wikipedia, which I very much appreciate. I like Wikipedia as sort of a first place to begin my research.
Oh yeah, it's great.
It is, because I think some educators are biased against it, thinking that it's not well researched, or it's not coming from a legitimate website. But actually, I find that with a lot of Wikipedia entries, depending on the discipline, they're actually edited and created by deep subject matter experts. And these people can actually get into like fisticuffs sometimes about their facts because they really want it to be accurate.
That's true.
So
scroll down to the bottom and look at all the references. I find it one of the best. They have some of the best bibliographies anywhere.
Absolutely. Like sometimes there's like 21 different resources that people have used in creating the entry. So just a short little ad for Wikipedia to say to people, don't slam it just on the basis of it being open source. Like, teach your learners how to assess the value of an entry. I find that in history, like in different domains, like in history and politics and psychology, a lot of the entries are really, really well built out by people who know what they're talking about. Like a lot of profs hang out on Wikipedia.
They do. That's true.
Okay, so with that little advertisement aside, the example of consilience here I chose was evolution. So the theory of evolution, for example, is supported by a convergence of evidence from genetics, molecular biology, paleontology, geology, biogeography, comparative anatomy, comparative physiology, and many other fields. In fact, the evidence within each of these fields is itself a convergence, providing evidence for the theory. As a result, to disprove evolution, most or all of these independent lines of evidence would have to be found in error. So having good consilience across disciplines when you're trying to strengthen a theory is actually a good thing. The strength of the evidence considered together as a whole results in the strong scientific consensus that the theory is correct. We can never actually prove a theory, we can only disprove it. But when you've got 18 disciplines pointing in the direction of, yeah, you probably did evolve,
Yes.
then we know we've got some pretty good, we can draw some pretty good conclusions. Now, one of the things you've got here written is, even when subjects are kept segregated, I think you've talked about this, even when subjects are kept segregated in a formal learning environment, learners will see connections across the barriers. It's part of what humans do.
Yeah,
that tacks back to what you were saying about the learner who was like, what was it? We're not learning English right now. We're learning.
Yeah. Don't talk to me about English and social studies. Yeah.
It's social studies.
Yeah, I know it's really something. We often will talk about like statistics when you're talking about political decision making, and how do we actually view quantitative information. So if somebody's making a decision based on like a political decision, and they're using means instead of modes or medians, all things like that. So mixing up those disciplines and seeing where they go. I've even been looking at some of the relationships between things that are theories in physics and theories in leadership that are the same.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not surprised. Is this a new rabbit hole that you are in at the moment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's another thing that I don't have time to do, that I'm trying to write about. But it's about physics concepts in leadership contexts, and it's like momentum and mass and acceleration and all those things, and just kind of using those same principles as an analogy in leadership, and it worked quite well.
Super interesting. Well, it's like the systems thinking book, right? It's like, this book is loaded with examples of consilience between like the business sector and simple machines. Interesting.
That reminds me, actually, one of our competencies at the school, we sort of base our learning here on 8 competencies within 10 contexts. But the 8 competencies, one of them is ecological literacy. And so not only is consilience a thing we use, but it's also something we teach, in the sense that you need to consider that something doesn't exist by itself. It exists, if it's in a closed system, there's a very good likelihood that it's related to other elements in that closed system, and it affects those elements and is affected by them. So when you're talking about concepts, you have to make sure that people, if they're in a system that's closed, you have to make sure people understand how it touches on other elements. And so it's not exactly the same as consilience, but it's related to it, knowing the interrelationship of things.
Mm-hmm. So now, I love this last point that you were making about consilience. I will read, when a school promotes the concept of consilience, it fights against the notion that disciplines are separate by nature, rather than just a convenient set of containers designed to organize teachers more than learning. And I thought that really struck a chord with me, because there are so many things about, the classical education system that are difficult to articulate. Like, you kind of know something is wrong, but what is it that's wrong? And then, you go along and put your finger right on it. And I thought, to a very large extent, we've created schools around the needs of the adults. Adults need a coffee break at 10:30 in the morning, and adults need a break at noon. And, it works well for adults to have the children come and be in your classroom for 45 minutes and then leave and go to a different classroom. So we've ended up sort of creating this, this system that really is in honor of the grown-ups, and not so much in honor of the children or the youth. And you have flipped that on its head at your school. So add a little bit of information about how you have changed that model.
Yeah, sure. I mean, by not dividing up the day into subject-based containers, except for very few things that kind of make sense, like learning a learning a second language. Probably a good idea to have time where that's what you're doing at that time. But even that, we've done that through playing role-playing games and all kinds of other ways. But anyway, what it means is now we are organizing our learning around what people need. And what that looks like is different because we have 100 different learners who have different needs. So it's not to say everyone's doing everything completely individually all the time, but someone might need something, at a particular time. We offer a group session, other people come because they go, yeah, I could do that right now. Or they go, what is that? I'd like to know what that is right now. So a lot of our sort of scheduled things happen, we call it just in time scheduling. So we have a placeholder for something that might be related to reading, writing, speaking, listening, which is one of our competency areas. And then we go, okay, that placeholder is now going to be filled with somebody who wants to know about rhetorical and dialectic methods, which is what we did yesterday. And a bunch of people went, what the heck are rhetorical methods? And then they came to it and went, oh, that's really cool. And there were a few people that wanted to know because they were looking at, some ancient philosophers and others who wanted to know because they want to know how to persuade their parents to be able to borrow the car, and everything in between, and just like the psychology of it, the philosophy of it. So we end up having a schedule that's about what people actually need when they need it, instead of hoping that it might possibly line up with what somebody needs at the time we've decided to already do it. The other part is that when I was saying it's built for teachers, it's that it's built on the idea of the teacher, as you said before, as subject specialist. And it was really a way of preserving your job, which is, I am the math teacher, so there has to be a thing called math so that I know that that's what I'm doing and I'm the person who is entitled to that position. But when you're in our school, it's like, what do you teach? And everybody kind of always laughs. Like, it's the same, so what do you teach? And I'm like, I don't really know how to answer that. I teach everything, and then sometimes the component that I'm teaching might have, physics or literature in it. So it's always a longer answer than anybody really wants. But it certainly shakes up the idea that you could have like tenure as the senior physics teacher, because there's no such thing. It's a totally constructed hierarchy, and it just doesn't make any sense.
And do you think, how hard is it going to be for major mainstream education to move away from that? How tied are we to having those titles?
I think we've created an infrastructure that relies on those titles. So I think the hard part is about reconsidering all of the things that are built on that structure. So I think people could let go of it pretty easily, because I know all our teachers, they just love working here because it's an absolute joy all the time. It's just really a fun place to work, and good learning happens. But I also know in a mainstream system where maybe your job depends on the fact that you fit all the lines in your job description that allows you to retain your position. Otherwise, somebody maybe with seniority comes and takes it. We have built jobs around specialization rather than jobs around teaching and learning. They're not about that. We say, okay, everybody's teaching, great. Okay, now this is your specialty, and this is how your job is, how you hang on to it. So I think if we strip that away, for some people, it would be really scary, because it would be the loss of job security.
Right. So, okay, there's another plug for learning about changing systems, people.
Oh man, yeah, it's true.
Go get that book, or get Peter Senga's book on systems as well. And while you're at it, order E.O. Wilson's Consilience.
Yes.
So I had a couple other questions, but I am just mindful of our time. I do want to point out to people that you've mentioned just a moment ago about the competencies that the Pacific School of Innovation and Inquiry uses. You've got these 8 categories, and those can be found and downloaded and used straight off of the SCI website, which is www.learningstorm.org. Yep. I will ask one of my final questions, because I think probably people are curious. When you are working at SCI and you're engaged in this fun kind of day, walking alongside learners. Do you get a break as an adult? Like, do you get lunch? How do you make that happen?
Well, I mean, as much as any teacher does, I remember my method teacher in English at UVic a long time ago teaching me. During the class at UVic, she said someone had to go to the bathroom, and she goes, "Enjoy it. It's the last time you're going to go to the bathroom until you retire, when you actually have to go." So teachers probably don't do that enough anyway. We just, like when you were talking about adults need a break at noon. Well, we just say, when is it a good time to have a break? And so it might be something like looking around and say, "I got to go get a sandwich now. Is everybody all right with that?" And it's like, yeah. So it's like a real workplace where you say,
Real
what work
workplace.
needs to be done? Can we do it if I stop for a minute? And usually you can. Or you say, "I'm going to stop for a minute. See you in a little bit of time." Okay. So, it's a human environment instead of this artificial, when that bell goes, I have exactly 6 minutes to run down the hall, go to the bathroom and run back again, or the world is going to end. Well, we just don't have that.
See, and in my last job, I was super lucky because my classroom was right next to the bathroom. And so,
Great.
and my children were so awesome at like autopilot. And so I would just sort of slip away and use the bathroom and slip back in, and they would hardly notice. But don't tell the police, because then I wasn't really in loco parentis.
Oh, I know, it's so scary. It's what would think of all the terrible things that could happen.
All the terrible things that children get up to when you let them actually have some independence. Yes.
It's true. It's pretty funny.
Awesome talking with you, Jeff. And we are going to do more of these programs. We'll work our way through the 20 convictions. We are going to have some guests here and there to talk to and to kind of go a little bit deeper on some of these concepts. And School of Thought is just going to keep evolving as our education system evolves. So it's great to be doing this with you.
Yeah, likewise. It's a lot of fun. Good conversation as usual.
Yep. All right. We'll see you next time.
See you next time. Thanks.